All right, welcome future lawyers. Today we're jumping right into a concept that is, and I mean this, absolutely central to public international law. We're talking about how the whole global community holds entire nations accountable for their actions. This is really the bedrock of how international law works. So let's get started.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the absolute foundations, what we mean by state and custom. Then we'll get into why any of this is so important. After that, we'll look at some real-world examples, see how these rules are actually enforced, and then we'll wrap it all up by boiling everything down to 3 core principles that you can take with you.
First things first. Before we can even talk about state liability, we have to be super clear on the 2 ideas that the whole thing is built on. You've got customary international law on one hand and the principle of state liability on the other.
So our first pillar here is customary international law. Now, you can think of this as the world's unwritten rulebook. Seriously, it's not something you'll find in one single document. Instead, it's law that just emerges from how nations behave over time because they all kind of agree that this is the right and legal way to do things.
And here's the second pillar, state liability. This is a huge one. It's the idea that countries, just like people, can't just do whatever they want without consequences. If a state's actions, or even its inaction, causes harm to another country, its people, or, say, the environment we all share, it has to be held responsible.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. For one of these customs to actually become binding law, you need 2 ingredients. It's like a recipe. First, you need widespread state practice. Lots of countries doing the same thing for a long time. But that's not enough. You also need something called opinio juris. That's the key. It's the belief, the feeling states have that they're doing this not just because it's polite, but because they are legally obligated to. You need both. Without that belief, it's just a habit. With it, it's law.
Okay, so we've covered the what. We know what these principles are. But as a lawyer, you always have to ask the next question, which is why? Why does the system of accountability even exist? What's the point?
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? You've got all these powerful sovereign nations. Why would they care about unwritten rules? What makes these customs so incredibly vital for keeping the world from falling into chaos?
Well, here's the bottom line. Without state liability, you risk total international anarchy. I mean, this whole framework is what allows for peaceful relations. It gives us a basis for fairness, it stops countries from just harming each other with no comeback, and it protects the stuff we all share, like the environment. It also plays a huge role in upholding human rights and really just maintaining global safety.
All right, enough theory. Let's get practical. It's one thing to talk about these big ideas, but let's see how they actually play out with the kind of complex, messy issues you're going to face in your careers.
Okay, here's a classic example, transboundary pollution. So, picture this. A factory in country A is pumping out pollution that drifts into a river. That river then flows across the border into country B, totally contaminating their water supply. Well, under customary international law, country A has a duty to stop that harm and probably pay for the cleanup.
This is such a powerful example of how this works. You see, customary law says that some basic human rights are universal. So if a government starts committing horrible violations against its own people, inside its own borders, its sovereignty isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. The rest of the world has a legal basis to act, maybe through sanctions or other forms of pressure.
And, nowhere is this stuff more critical than during a war. The rules of engagement, things like not targeting civilians on purpose or not using chemical weapons, those are deeply, deeply rooted in customary law. And if a state breaks those rules, it opens itself up to some serious liability.
So a law is only as good as your ability to enforce it, right? And you're probably thinking, okay, but there's no world police to go arrest a country. So how do you actually make these rulings stick? Well, let's look at the key players.
Pay attention here because this is a distinction that trips a lot of people up. You have the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. Think of it as the UN's top court, and it deals with disputes between states, countries arguing with other countries. Then you have the International Criminal Court, the ICC. It's totally different. It goes after individuals like presidents, generals, warlords for the absolute worst crimes. So remember, ICJ for states, ICC for people. It's a crucial difference.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's zoom out and boil this entire, very complex topic down to its absolute essence. You'll find that everything we've talked about is really guided by 3 core principles. And here they are. First up, the no harm rule. It's pretty simple. Don't cause significant harm to your neighbors. Second,
good faith. This is the idea that states have to deal with each other honestly and fairly. And third, reparation. This is key. If a state breaks the rules and causes damage, it has a duty to make things right again, either by fixing the problem or paying for the damage. Look, if you walk away from this explainer and only remember one thing, let it be this. It really is the heart of the whole concept. If a country causes harm, it must take responsibility. It's about accountability. It's as simple and as complicated as that.
And that brings us to the big final question, one I want to leave you to think about as you continue your studies. We've seen the framework, but in a world full of powerful countries, each with its own interests, is a system based on unwritten rules and consent really strong enough to deliver justice every single time? That's a question that your generation of international lawyers, that's you, is going to have to answer.